Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are listening from, and welcome to 1% Better, where we take a look at hidden stories in sport. I'm Zylan Fnack, and I'm joined by Dr. David Lipman. Your medical question today is: why do trained endurance athletes often show lower ventilation rates at a given submaximal intensity compared to untrained individuals?
Well, it depends what you mean by ventilation. I'm assuming you truly mean ventilation, which means that they need less oxygen, which is really simple, is that
More
they need less
efficiency.
oxygen because they're more efficient. Yeah, exactly right. So I thought you might also have erroneously been referring to like ventilation rates, uh, which is a different discussion. So we previously talked about cardiac output on a different podcast. Cardiac output is the product of stroke rate, stroke volume. Sorry, so how much blood is pumped out of the heart, and then stroke rate or heart rate, which is how many times it beats. Right. So you have how many beats and how much is pushed out per beat, and you can have similar in respiratory physiology. So you have deeper breathing and less breaths, or shallower breathing and more breaths. Now, the problem is that that's not quite as efficient in many ways. So as we breathe faster, we're probably less efficient, or it's not quite as effective in our ventilation because we have what they call physiological dead space. So gas gets trapped because we're trying to move air. It's a little bit, I don't want to get into it. It's super technical, but anyway, it doesn't matter.
The summary I have here is improved ventilatory efficiency, basically stronger respiratory muscles, better CO2 clearance, and lower lactate production at the same workload.
Sure. Although lactate doesn't cause us to breathe.
I'm sure
Carbon. So
it's a byproduct.
you breathe because of accumulation of carbon dioxide, unless you're a smoker, in which case you breathe because of low oxygen, because you get used to higher levels of carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide.
Why would people smoke? Why even would you smoke? I mean, apart from it does look cool in certain instances, I must say. If you're sitting there in a suit somewhere outside an old cafe, there are ways where it can look cool, but why even smoke? Makes no sense to me, man. We are supported on this podcast by Precision Fuel and Hydration. They are our day ones. They've been with us forever, and you and I both love their products. We love their chews. We love their gels. I haven't been training much for the last months as I'm getting ready for spinal fusion, but I have been drinking their electrolytes religiously despite what I'm doing. So we do have a discount code for you on your first purchase, 15% off that first purchase. That discount code is 1PB2025. That's the number 1PB2025. We also have a direct link in the show notes below that'll apply that discount code immediately. David, coming up on this podcast is a super cool guest in Mario Fraioli. He is of the Morning Shakeout newsletter fame, a really, really big newsletter in the endurance space, one of the biggest out there. Really, really cool chatting to him. I felt like we could just talk forever.
I can talk to Mario forever. That's how we got him on the podcast. I often catch up with him. He's a friend of mine, and yeah, we always have great conversations. It's hard when you have a conversation off podcast, as I do with Mario regularly. I'm just like, I wish this was on air. This is such good, this is so great. So I try to manufacture that to some degree, and Mario gets the game. He was really good. So unbelievable insights. I think where I think I'm excited to have this podcast out is, I think, firstly, if you haven't heard of Mario before, go check out his newsletter, go look at his previous writing, go listen to his podcast of the Morning Shakeout name as well. He's unbelievable. But Mario is a real student of the sport and a real historian of the sport. So he gives context to so many things we're seeing now, which I think is so important and so cool, particularly if you're newer to endurance sports, particularly running. I think we give some thoughts. It's the time of year where people are maybe struggling for content to consume. So we give some thoughts on things to go watch and whatever else. They're also super motivated. So yeah. Anyway, I don't want to sort of spoil too much, but we just really appreciate Mario joining us. It was really cool, and he was like, "Oh, I could have kept going for ages," and I said, "Oh, we'll get you back on." So if you do like this, please let us know. Comment on Spotify, DM us on Instagram, etc., etc. We'll obviously pass this on to Mario, as we do with all guests, and then we'll look to get him back potentially as well. So yeah.
Before we get to Mario, we do have to say a big thank you to Stride Running Power Meters for supporting this podcast over the last few months. Thanks so much for being with us, Stride, and we hope that you have checked them out. If you haven't yet, we do have a link in the show notes down below. That link is unique to our podcast, so it helps us if you visit them through there. David, I know you've been using Stride for the longest time and find a lot of value in the metrics that they give you from your runs.
Yeah, ironically, like the power is good, but it's almost everything else that I prefer, or not prefer, but I use more of. A lot of the gait kinematic stuff, a lot of the stiffness and these sort of metrics that I think we otherwise don't really have an insight into, can't
What is
measure in any way.
stiffness?
So it's like how stiff you are on the ground. So you want to be more stiff to be more efficient, basically. You don't want to, if you think about it, like if you hit the ground and then turn to muck, you're obviously getting inefficient, right? We've all seen these runners who are like laboring, who are like collapsing each time, as opposed to that where you're very still and you're just smacking the ground. If you think about it, like violently smacking the ground, you'll be a lot faster than if you just turn to mud each time you hit the ground. So it's things like that that I'm tracking. So uh, the words are appropriately emotive and appropriately extreme. Let's put it that way, in my language there. But we are thankful to Stride, so please go check them out, and check out some of their content as well. They put out some really good content, both video and blog. And then finally, we're going to thank Core Body Temperature Sensors. Core's been sponsoring us, as regular listeners would know. We've done a big push in the last quarter of this year on heat and heat training, and core is a key part of that. It's I've been doing a lot with core myself personally for probably a year and a half, 2 years now. Yeah, so really cool metrics there. We have a unique tracking link, so again, go check them out. If you do buy, please having used our link to get there, because that does help attribute the podcast as well. These are the sort of partners that allow us to make the podcast, allow us to pay for recording software, etc. So we do appreciate you supporting the partners who support us,
I've
and we
got a
appreciate.
bonus question for you
Okay.
with regards to heat. It relates to heat. It relates to
Okay.
core body temperature. What's one of the earliest adaptations the body makes during heat acclimation training? I'm talking like
In,
first few days.
increase sweat rate.
The answer I have here is increase plasma volume.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that is very true. Actually, that is the first one that goes. You'll see an increased sweat rate as well. But yeah, so increased plasma volume. So you have basically more blood, so more fluid in the pipes. Yeah. So that is a very quick adapting system. Which is also why your heart rate changes so quickly. So this is when people talk about heart rate goes up when they've had some time off, or goes down very quickly or whatever. It's like it's not fitness related. It's plasma volume related more so, and that's part of fitness, of course, but it's a bit more. It's like nuanced, I guess. But yeah, thank you to all of those who do support us, support our partners, because they help us produce the podcast. For those who haven't yet subscribed to the podcast, please do it. It really helps us. So please do subscribe to the podcast. They share it with somebody, particularly this one. I think this will be one that people love. And of course, engage with the podcast on social media. We have a Strava group. There's a link in our show notes. We're on Instagram. We're on X. We're on all of it. So engage with us there, follow us there, and help us grow.
Right. Let's get to Mario Fraioli. Mario Fraioli is a running coach, author, podcaster, and runner. As a coach, he works with a range of people from elites to everyday runners, having guided people to Boston Marathon qualifiers, FKTs, national titles, Olympic trials appearances, marathon majors, age group wins, international podiums, world championship teams, national records, and the Olympic Games. Having started his writing career in 2004 as the running columnist at the Worcester Telegram and Gazette and copy editor in the sports department, he progressed to Competitor magazine, which became Podium Runner and is now called Outside Runner, where he was the senior editor. He's also written for Runner's World, New England Runner, and Triathlete magazine, during which time he also wrote his first book. Listen to this title: The Official Rock and Roll Guide to Marathon and Half Marathon Training. Despite all of this, he's probably best known for his industry leading weekly newsletter, The Morning Shakeout, which is read by over 14,000 people. He's been publishing that for over 10 years. In his wide ranging running career, starting in 1997, Mario has competed in races from 800-meter distance to ultra marathons. He was an NCAA Division II All American in cross country at Stonehill College in 2003. He has a marathon PB of 2:27, faster than David, so I like him already. A mile PB of 4:09 and a 50-mile PB of 7:59. Most recently, Mario competes for the West Valley Track Club as one of the top masters in the 40 plus category athletes in the country. Mario is also a dog lover, has great musical taste, and one of the best book collections you will ever find. Mario, David, and I have been talking about this for months. Finally, you are here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you both so much for having me. It's exciting to be here.
I just want to set the record straight. He's not faster than me. He's in a different category than I am. Like he's not. It's not like he's a 2:39 guy. He finishes the race, goes, puts on his clothes, and then I finish the race. So we're not the same stratosphere. Be that in a mile or a marathon. So thank you for joining us, Mario. It's great to have you. We had a conversation last week. And I was like, at that point, I was just like, we just got to get this on air. We got to get this conversation on air for people. I think your history as both a runner and a student of the sport and a historian of the sport to some degree, I think puts you in a space to talk about running in a way that I think brings context to the modern day that most people would do well hearing. So with that as the preface, can we start with running booms? I think I've heard you talk about this a little bit. I think the running booms and contextualizing them would be super helpful for people.
Yeah. So I believe, and this is not me who initiated it, but others have said we're in the third running boom, and I believe that. And I mean, I'm not exactly sure when you could say it started, maybe 2018, 2020, somewhere in that ballpark, but certainly at least the last 5 years, maybe a little bit longer than that. And I think that's coming out of COVID, with the advent of super shoes, with the increased interest in races of all distances and disciplines in running. There's just been a huge explosion in the number of people who run, the number of people who are participating in running events and competitions, pushing their limits to see how much faster they can go. I'm based here in the US. We're seeing it at the high school level as well. It's always been a popular sport, cross country and track and field, but just the depth here in distance running all the way down to the sprints even is dizzying. So I mean, I feel very confident saying like we are definitely in a boom cycle right now as far as running goes. To go back to the previous two running booms, the first is widely regarded as happening in the 1970s. Here in the US, it was around the 72 games in Munich with Frank Shorter winning Olympic gold in the marathon. Steve Prefontaine also ran in the 5,000 and came in fourth, a race that is still talked about today, probably even more than Frank Shorter's win. But Shorter's win was huge. I mean, it really um, increased interest in running in the US. You've got Bill Bowerman, who co-founded Nike, came out with a book called Jogging. Arthur Lydiard was becoming very popular during that time and spreading things about training theory. So that was a huge moment. I mean, it was like the running boom of the 70s. It's oft talked about, but it was very much a competitive thing, mostly. But with Bowerman's book Jogging, I mean, there were people who were running more frequently for health, and that was before my time. I was born in 1982, so I don't remember that specifically. But fast forward, another almost 20 years, and these things are seeming to happen on 20-year cycles. But it was in the 1990s, and a big part of that was Oprah ending up on the cover of Runner's World, showing that hey, anyone can run a marathon. And Runner's World, which had been in existence since the 1970s, certainly at that time started to shift in terms of who it was catering to. It wasn't so much toward the competitive athletes, it was more toward the recreational runner and people who were looking for experiences in running and to challenge themselves with goals, but also just to live, sort of a healthy lifestyle. So it's a kind of a long, meandering, disconnected way of getting to this current boom that we're in, which is widely regarded as the third boom. And I do think has a lot of different touch points in it, competitive, cultural, um, health focused, and that's very different than the first two, which were kind of, you know, uh, not so not so involved as the current one is. So
Yeah, I think they probably speak to some of the microcosm of the time, right? Like social media is feeding part of what we're seeing,
yes.
of course.
Mhm.
I think the second one probably helped us. If you think about them as a straight line, you probably had the 70s started it in more competitive realms, and then it started to be more democratized through the second and into the third, right? Whereby now you have people who wouldn't ever race, who are just going out and jogging with whatever else.
Yeah, and you touch on something interesting with social media's influence and impact on the current running boom that obviously did not exist in the 90s and certainly not in the 70s, but media in general has played a big part in these booms happening. So back in the 70s, I mean, Frank Shorter wins the Olympic marathon. It's on TV and people are getting that broadcast into their living room, and then it's being picked up, or even outside of that particular performance, a lot of these track meets, USSR versus USA or whatever it is, it's picked up by bigger magazines like Sports Illustrated, which is covering everything, but they're prominently featuring running and track and field, which just does not happen today. And the influence of those legacy types of publications has certainly dropped, right? And then fast forward to, the 1990s, or right around 2000, it's less that mass media like legacy publication. I guess you could call Runner's World a legacy publication, but it's really like an enthusiast, type of magazine, and that was the heyday of Runner's World, just in terms of its subscription and reaching people in that way. And these days it's neither of those things really. I mean, yeah, you still see the Olympics on NBC here in the US and other big channels around the world. Runner's World and similar publications still exist, but it's really, social media and individuals who are showing what they're doing, what they're experiencing, what they're learning, and casting that out to, their audiences. So it's spreading a lot differently. And most of that is happening through social media, but it's certainly happening through other means as well.
Where do you sit with that, Mario? Are you for and against it? And my question is twofold. It's with regards to the media and the landscape and how things have changed,
Mhm.
and also the running boom. Are you one of those older runners who have set rules for these new, cool, hip runners coming in, and these are the rules they have to follow for us, or do they create their own way? So my question is twofold: the running boom, the runners. Where do you sit with new people coming into the sport, and also the change in landscape in media?
Well, I'm all for people coming into the sport and doing things that are going to improve their lives, which I think is what running fundamentally does, no matter what you get into it for or how you get into it. So I would never discourage that. I am against gatekeepers, and there are a lot of gatekeepers who are like just very resistant to people, treading on their ground, so to speak. I mean, you have a lot of competitive runners who don't understand why people would get into running for physical and mental health reasons, for social reasons, for artistic reasons, and in some cases, and they sort of dismiss those folks. But then you have some of those folks who are just turned off by the competitive side of the sport and don't want anything to to do with that. And it's like, look, I mean, there's more common ground between why we do these things than there are differences. And I think, I mean, you could extend this out past running, but I think if you just got to talk to people a little bit more and understand why they got into, the sport or the activity or the culture, whatever it is, I think you'd have people who are just more tolerant and appreciative of it. And I wish there were more of that. So I don't love the gatekeepers, but I do love that there are more people getting in. And I think, look, this is a big enough tent that anyone who wants to run, whatever it means for them to do that, should be welcome under that and can coexist with others. But I mean, that's the thing about this boom, is it's not just a competitive boom. And I think, you know, that bothers some of the people who are in it purely for competitive reasons, or that's what running means to them. But look, I mean, I think a lot of those other folks also prop up the competitive side of the sport as well, or will garner some interest from people. So um, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of my
Well,
thought on it.
I think it's helpful for people to hear that um, a marathon start line these days, what is considered a good time is often sub three, right? Everyone's sort of a sub three. At marathon start lines in the 70s, there was nobody who wasn't running sub three. Like
Mhm.
there was, a handful of people. And if you were going, probably even 3 hours was like considered pretty average. So it's just
Mhm.
it's almost a different sport in that respect. Like it really is a wholesale shift in what running is for a marathon even.
Well, it's interesting because you're absolutely right. I mean, back in the 70s, people weren't running marathons to raise money for charity or to go see a destination city or have a girls' weekend. They were there to race. And so if you look at the results of those races, they were deep. And if you weren't fast, you probably weren't running because you didn't feel like you fit in with that crowd. And that's just what it just wasn't about that. I mean, the depth is staggering if you go back and look at some of those races. And then as marathons became more participatory in the 90s and into the early 2000s, that depth was a lot less. I mean, a lot less. It was really not that hard still to get into the Boston Marathon back then. The Olympic trial standards here in the US were a lot less than they are now. The depth at the front was certainly not what it was in the 70s, but it's also not what it is now. It's a lot better now. It's kind of come back around, and it's still not at that level of the 1970s. But if you look at the Boston Marathon, for example, it's getting harder and harder to qualify for that race every year. The cutoffs are getting um, bigger and bigger to get into that. Here at the high school level, like what was considered fast, you know, 10 years ago is not even close to getting you in heat one in some of the faster meets here. The Olympic trial standards are just getting faster and faster every year. The world standards are getting faster and faster every year. And if you look at the results from a lot of these top races, again, still not quite at the level of the 1970s, but it's certainly a lot deeper than it was 10, 15 years ago. So there is definitely an increase in interest in the competitive side of the sport, and there's more information out there now, and I think people are curious to see what it is that they can do. But in some ways, like, some of this is coming back around to what it was, early on, and then there's a lot of new stuff that's popping up as well.
Yeah. And are you generally positive about where we're at with running, or are you concerned? And there's lots of levels to that, right? So Zylan
That's a
alluded to the participation sort of levels, but there's probably an elite level concern. There's probably some of those other factors as well in there.
um I have some concerns. It is very, very layered. I don't know how long we have to talk about all of these different
As
things.
long as you need, you
But
pontificate. You're a guest here.
I mean, just on the media side of things, as we talked about a little while ago, social media is kind of where people are spending a lot of their time and getting most of their information now. And there's benefits to that. It's easier than ever to share your story or share someone else's story or get information out there, but there's downsides to that as well. I mean, David, you and I have talked about this offline, just about the information that gets put out, because on social media, it helps if you're just very, like, absolutist about something, like, this is the way to do it, because that's going to generate a lot of eyeballs, and that's going to generate a lot of back and forth, but it might not be good information. And I think it's easier than ever to put stuff out, but it's also easier than ever to consume just bad information, right? So I don't love that side of it, because as a coach, I mean, I'll get questions from my athletes fairly often about things that they saw on Instagram, and if there's any validity to it. And I mean, that's why I think I'm going to have a job for a long time as a coach, because I can have those conversations and talk about what I know through my experience, because I've been in this game for a long time and I know what to watch out for. But I do worry about people who are getting into running today, who have no prior experience with the sport, who don't understand the history, aren't totally sure where to look, because they're just basically like walking into a fire hose of information. It's harder than ever to understand what is valid, what is not, who should I be listening to, who should I be ignoring. Just finding that signal through the noise. There's a lot of noise out there.
And any advice on like navigating that for people, for listeners here?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think understand, and I'm not just saying this to, like, pat myself on the back, but try and seek out and understand people who have been in this game for a long time. I think experience is huge. People who understand the history of the sport and how training theory has evolved, who understand the culture and how various cultural elements of running have evolved over time. And it might take you a while to find those folks, because some of them are on social media, but not many are.
Yeah.
It involves going to a library and taking out books and really going down the rabbit hole and trying to understand like the history and how things have, evolved over time. But again, it's not it's not something that is going to be a quick hit. I mean, that's just going to take some time and effort. And I mean, that's part of the problem is people don't want to put time and effort into anything now. It's just like, just tell me what to do. Give me the quick solution. And that's what I have a major problem with, because, distance running is hard. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're trying to race and set a personal best, or if you're trying to just finish your first marathon, or if it's just something you're trying to stick with for a number of years. Like physically it's hard on the body, mentally it's challenging on the mind. There are no quick fixes to any of this stuff. It takes trial and error. It takes time to understand your body and how to work through difficult situations, and all that kind of stuff. And so that would be my biggest word of recommendation to folks.
Here's a question for you. I need to check your book out, and I love the title, The Official
I
Rock
hate the
and Roll
title.
Guide. When did you
So
write this?
I wrote that book in 2013 when I was working for Competitor Magazine as a senior editor. And we were part of the Competitor Group, which at the time owned the Rock and Roll Marathon series, which was expanding its portfolio to almost 40 or so events. We had a lot of media publications, and we had a publishing arm, Velo Press. And I had an idea for a book that I still want to write, that I went to Velo Press with. And they said, that's a great idea, but we've been thinking about this other book and we think you're the perfect person to write it. And it was the aforementioned official rock and roll guide to half marathon training. And it was to be sold in the Reg Path and at the expos and in traditional bookstores as well. And I'm proud of the book and I stand behind everything that's in there, but all of the photos and the branding and a lot of the appendices in the back about the course, it's geared toward Rock and Roll Marathon series. All the training information and stuff that's in there, you could apply to any marathon or half marathon, but it wasn't the book that I wanted to write. And I think the name is just kind of, wordy. And it was the first and only book that I've ever written. I didn't know what I was doing, but that book scarred me, just the process of actually like writing it, which I could spare you that story. But I mean, I think the information in there is solid, but I would certainly, 12 years later, I would certainly update a few things in there.
Well, that was going to be my question, and maybe you answered it. Is with the evolution of training and how quickly things change, is there something that you would edit and change and update now?
The biggest would probably be the sections on nutrition and recovery, just because there's been so many advancements in both of those areas, and they are very connected as well, which has always been understood, but I don't think was as well understood 12 years ago as it is now. So I would almost completely overhaul those sections and tie them together a little more closely. The X's and O's of training that I have in there, not much of that has changed, at least for the audience that this is geared to, which is more the people who are trying to either finish their first half marathon or marathon or run a little bit faster, but aren't necessarily an advanced athlete.
Yeah. The basics are still the basics, thankfully.
Yeah, the basics are still the basics. Those have not changed. And that's what I wish more people would understand. It's like the fundamentals of training have really not changed all that much. I mean, things get new words all the time. You know, I mean, just like with like threshold and tempo and like what these things mean. I mean, some of it's like people speak about it as if it's this, Columbus discovered the new world or something. And it's like, no, this stuff has been around forever. It's been called a million different things. It's been applied in this way before. Like double threshold workouts weren't invented, 7 years ago by the Norwegians. Like people have been doing that kind of stuff for years. It's just now it's marketable, right? I think everyone's looking for a way to market things. And I mean, that's a big change, I think, in recent years, and certainly brought about by social media, because people are trying to sell you something, whether it's a training plan or an idea or whatever it happens to be. And that's stuff that kind of drives me crazy. But the fundamentals have not changed. I mean, they really have not changed in a very, very long time.
Your friend and colleague Steve Magnus has a running haiku that I think sums it up well. I never remember it properly, but it's like run a lot of miles, some of them hard, occasionally see God or something like that. And
Yep.
and it's perfect. I really like that running haiku. Um, so on the running front,
Mm-hmm.
is there much you think that can be done to improve fandom and the uptake of running as a sort of from the mass market appeal, not so much participatory, but more support? Because at the moment, it still feels like a dedicated few who are watching running, if I'm honest.
It is. I mean, it's very much a niche sport. I mean, outside of the Olympics every 4 years, which gets, broadcast to everyone on the biggest networks, NBC here in the US. I mean, you don't see a lot of high level running events on TV or front and center on networks that aren't endemic to the sport itself. And I mean, that was a big thing in the 70s. I mean, Sports Illustrated would have Jim Ryan on the cover, Steve Prefontaine on the cover, Henry Rono on the cover, and people who weren't necessarily runners themselves would get exposure to these folks and what it is that they were doing, and there'd be something to follow there. And that is definitely not happening quite as much. I mean, I think the media brands within the sport itself are doing a pretty good job of telling stories and broadcasting the races, even on the trail side of things. I mean, almost everything worthwhile is being live streamed now, which was certainly not happening 10 years ago, and adds an exciting new element to things. But the people who are watching that are the people who are already interested in it, right? And they're talking about it in their small circle of friends who are also interested in that stuff. So that's the nut that really needs to be cracked. And I don't know how that happens, but it has to go beyond that, right? And I think maybe some of that comes from more non-endemic sponsors getting into the sport, because most of the money that's supporting these things, the athletes themselves, the events, the broadcasts, are shoe companies and nutrition companies and brands that are very much, in the sport. So maybe that's part of it. I think, getting in front of eyeballs of people who are sports fans and just giving them something exciting and compelling and something to follow, is also part of it. And I mean, that's one of running's biggest problems is it's hard to follow. I mean, you have the Olympics every 4 years, so that one's kind of baked in and people understand what that is. But I mean, you've got the Diamond League, which anyone outside of the sport doesn't really understand what that is. You've got Grand Slam track, which was kind of a flop in its first year, but maybe they can get some momentum there. You've got people who, you know, like Eliud Kipchoge, who would race 2 marathons a year for you know, 10 years of his career. So you're not seeing him in many other places. There's a lack of rivalries, which means there's a lack of rivalries to talk about. So I think that makes it challenging as well. So I think within the sport itself, there needs to be some kind of streamlining that happens so that there is a kind of a coherent schedule and thus narrative to follow. And then I think once that's established, there's probably going to be a media partner or brand that says, okay, well, we can showcase this in our own way. I mean, there's been some inroads. I mean, Netflix had the Sprint series, which I thought was, fantastic. But I mean, sprinters race maybe a couple times indoors, and then they have the outdoor circuit, and depending on their incentives, they may or may not race each other week in and week out. They may not race each other at all during a season. And I mean, that series was compelling, but it's hard to follow. I mean, because then you don't hear from Noah Lyles or Gabby Thomas or any of these other folks for what, like 6 to 8 months of the year, right? So um I think some of that needs to be cleaned up first, which is no no light lift at all. But then I think you're more apt to be getting these like non-endemic media companies to want to broadcast that out to people who find it compelling. And I mean, I think that's what Michael Johnson was trying to do with Grand Slam track, was trying to create something that is compelling to the non-track nerd, right? And like have a series where these head-to-head matchups are happening fairly consistently. There is something to follow there. There's big money. I mean, I think he was onto something. Clearly, the execution was a bit off, as we know from paying attention to the headlines. But I mean, I think I was excited about that whole prospect, because like, okay, here's someone who's trying to do something differently. But then you have like, there's infighting, it's like Diamond League doesn't like Grand Slam track, but the athletes are like, well, this is more money than we could ever make at any other meet. So we're going to try to go, here, but then they're not supporting one another. And that, that doesn't help matters either. So it's, long story short, it's a mess. I'm not sure what the way out is. I'm not optimistic that we're going to see it happen anytime soon. And that's too bad, because I do think athletics, whether it is a 100-meter dash, 1,500-meter run, half marathon, marathon on the roads, or trail, like, it's head-to-head competition. I mean, people understand that first to the finish line wins. I mean, rivalries, people love to follow rivalries. People like seeing obstacles overcome. I mean, all the elements are there. But I mean, I think it's just a matter of, tightening things up and making it a little more coherent and easy to follow.
I reckon we need teams, non-endemic teams, or non-endemic sponsors sponsoring teams. We need less times and more races, more cross country, and less of this. Like, we know what time you should be running, and that's not fast, so we don't care.
Yeah, and that's another just gripe I have in general, is just the focus on times. I mean, you know, I personally just don't find that interesting. I mean, Nike had the Breaking Two event, or Ineos had that with Eliud Kipchoge, and I mean, you're watching one guy, and can he beat the clock? And I mean, maybe there's something compelling to that, because no one's ever run 159 anything for a marathon. I would rather watch, like, you know Eliud Kipchoge and Benson Kipruto go head to head over the last like 3K of a marathon and trade blows. I mean, my favorite marathon memory of all time, and I don't even remember what the time was. It was Chicago Marathon. It was Kebede and Sammy Wanjiru, and you can go find that race on YouTube. And these two guys were just trading blows over the last 2K of the Chicago Marathon, and I think they ran a fast time. I don't remember what the time was, and I think that says a lot right there. But I will never forget, like, oh my God, Wanjiru just surged. Oh, Kebede came back. Oh, Wanjiru just surged. Oh, Kebede came back. Oh, Wanjiru's done. He's done. Oh no, he pulled it out. Like, to me, that's like compelling. I'm like, I want to watch that again. I don't really, care about the times. And I've always believed too, like, if the setup is right and you create good competition, like, the times are going to follow. Like, people are going to run fast times, if the competition is there. I mean, look at the track. I mean, Jakob Ingebrigtsen's famous line is, "I am the pace setter," right? But he's trying to win the race, and he just thinks the best way for him to do it is by going hard from the gun, and that forces everybody else to, get on the train or get blown out the back. And I just think those races are so exciting to watch. So more competition, less focus on times. I mean, it's something, as where I spend most of my working time as a coach, and I'm working with, some pros and elite athletes who understand that. But a lot of the age group athletes that I work with, it's just about, the time. And I just think that's just such a, like, a narrow view of how to pursue this thing and get the most out of yourself ultimately. So
Yeah, it's storytelling, and storytelling is, we don't know what the outcome's going to be. Is there going to be success? Or is there going to be failure? Which is why when two
mhm.
guys or girls are head to head like that, we don't know what the outcome's going to be, so we glued to it. David, I wonder if you're onto something when you say we need more teams, because what's lacking in running is, especially with a lot of the East African athletes, because English isn't a first language, we don't know their stories. And it's not up to the athlete always to tell their story, because they don't often know how to, and they also don't often know how important it is. Whereas if you have an athlete contracted to a team can have full-time staff that take that up as a responsibility. And to your point, Mario, maybe non-endemic sponsors then come in and supersize that, and pay for that, and brand the teams as that. Maybe you're onto something, David.
Well, I mean, the big thing is, for once every 4 years, everyone cares about running, right? It's called the Olympics, and the reason I think they care is because they have someone they can shout for, and they don't care who it is or what. They don't need to know the story. That guy's wearing the colors that I support, therefore I support that person.
They
That's
run
why
for
we
your
need,
team, your country.
exactly.
I mean,
We
that's it.
need we need teams, especially if you're going to race twice a year like Kipchoge did. Would have been great for an NN running team to be competing against somebody else. And okay, so Iliad's not running today, but Joshua Cheptegei is, so I'll support him because I support Iliad. I like Iliad, I'll support him. Just like you support the Lakers when LeBron's not playing or whatever else. Like, you need something that you can grab onto and become a fan of that isn't an individual, because the individual's not going to be there every week. So you certainly need something like that, and someone you can yell for that that brings you in. Because again, I don't remember a lot of these guys' names, not because I don't want to, but because it's hard. And if they're on a team, I would. I don't struggle to remember the names of the players of the Steelers. I know them all. So I do love Sammy Wanjiru. I think he's the runner's favorite marathon runner. I reckon I've heard 6 or 7 people talk about how much they love Sammy Wanjiru. So yeah,
Well, and I mean, he's no longer with us, sadly,
yeah,
but he's someone that I think a lot of people who are just getting into the sport today have no idea who he is. And
no,
he is, if you had to pin it down to one person, he is the person who revolutionized how marathons are raced. And I remember when that happened. It was at the Beijing Olympics, and it was a brutally hot day, as it is in China in August, and he just went gangbusters, and he basically ran that marathon like it was a fartlek. I mean, he was surging, and then he would kind of recover, and then he would surge again, which was insane in those conditions and on that course. And he ran the Olympic record that day. And he wasn't trying to run 206; he was just trying to break everybody. And as a result, he ran 206 in some crazy conditions because he essentially went hard from the gun without pacemakers. And I mean, after that, um, marathons weren't just run a pace for 20 miles and race 10K. They were races from the get-go. And he showed that that was possible. And I mean, that's what I mean about history being important. I think I mean, maybe because I'm old, that doesn't feel like it was that long ago, even though it was, I think, 17 years ago at this point. But I mean, if you just got into running in the last 5 years, I guarantee you, if you took 100 runners who got into running in the last 5 years, said, you know who Sammy Wanjiru is? You'd probably get a 0 out of 100
yeah.
people who knew that. But if you understand the history of the sport, like, you realize, oh, he changed the way that marathons were run, and then time started really dropping after that. But it was purely based on, like, competition and people racing the marathon, rather than just, like, pacing it and turning it into a sprint. And I mean, I just I hope that those are the sort of things that just don't get lost in this, like, age of Instagram, instant everything. It's just like people pay attention to what's happening today, and then tomorrow they've forgotten about it. It's on to the next thing. It's like, no, like, history is important. You got to understand how these things have evolved, and how some of the things that we're seeing now, like, in some ways they're not very new. They're coming back around again, or they've, like, built off something else that's happened, in the past. And I think it's important to recognize that. Yeah, it just drives me nuts when something seemingly novel comes up. It's like, no, that's happened before, or that's happened because, of A, B, and C happening. That's led up to it. That type of thing.
Who are some other or a couple other races or racers, athletes that we should go that we could direct fans to go listen to? I mean, for me, it would be someone like, uh, you know, like Rod. Oh, hating
Dixon.
this. Dixon. Rod Dixon is the one I think to direct people to. I think would be
All I
great.
want to do is drink beer and train like an animal. That was
Yeah,
one of his
famous
famous
quote.
lines. I mean, one of the
Yeah,
most, I think, iconic photos, certainly in running, if not sport, is him winning the New York City Marathon. And he's got his hands up like this at the finish line. And I think it was Jeff Smith who he had out sprinted to the line. Again, competition, just devastated on the ground right behind him. It's just like one of the most amazing photos in sport. I mean, I think that was in the 80s sometime
yep,
that had happened. Haile Gebrselassie and Paul
yep.
Turgot. I mean, watching those guys go at it, you could throw Kenenisa Bekele in there as well. I think if we go to the women's side of things, back to the 80s, Joan Benoit Samuelson won the first
Yep.
women's Olympic marathon. I mean, she ran 2:21 for the marathon back in the 80s, which these days, 2:21 might get you on the podium somewhere, certainly probably still get you, like, in the top 10. Back then, that was a crazy time. And she's doing that not in super shoes and with no pacers, just racing people on a hard course. And I think is still the most iconic female marathoner of all time. So go check out Joan Benoit Samuelson. She's still, I mean, she's a lifelong Nike ambassador, so she's still at a lot of races and still
Yeah,
racing
yeah.
into her 70s at this point.
Wow.
But she is certainly one. Let's see. Going back.
I mean,
You know,
Paula Radcliffe comes to mind just
Paul
because she
Radcliffe,
was so
yes,
dominant.
exactly. Hmm.
And that classic head bob that she used to have coming down the finish line where you thought she was going to die. And, she broke 220 and held the record until recently.
Yep. Dababa,
Yep.
from Ethiopia. I
Tirunesh
mean,
Tababa. Yep.
won multiple cross country titles, but was also just a slayer on the track and did okay on the roads as well.
That's
I
awesome.
mean,
Let's leave it at that. I think people can go back and look at that. I won't ask you to rattle off all of track and field history off the top of your head. That was by just a morbid curiosity of some people to go have people look at. But I think that's great for people to go back and watch some of those things there. Um, how are you feeling about the state of US distance running in general? And then certainly with view towards like in the marathon, men versus women, because it seems that the US women are dominating to a level that the men aren't in terms of certainly depth.
yeah, I think that's true. And has been true for the last several years. It's starting to shift a little bit on the men's side. I mean, Connor Mance was just fourth in Chicago, almost
Yep.
on the podium. There were two American men in the top 10 at
New
New
York.
York this year. But I mean, with American women, I mean, you have, let's see, this is not in any particular order, but Molly Seidel got a medal at the 2021 Olympic Games. Going back even a few years from that, Shalane Flanagan won the New York City Marathon. Des Linden
Yep.
winning the
Boston.
Boston Marathon. I mean, that sort of thing has not happened on the men's side. I mean, you had Galen Rupp, who got an Olympic medal in Rio in 2016. I mean, that was a
10K.
while
Yep.
ago now, but um, we haven't seen anyone on the American men's side get up that high in recent memory. But I think the overall health of the competitive sport here in the U.S. is very good. The marathon still seems to be the one we haven't quite figured out yet. I mean, if you go and half marathon as well, which is less prestigious at a global level, but on the track, I mean, you've got Grant Fisher won two
Yep.
medals. Cole
Garrett
Hawker is the
Eggers.
Olympic champion. Go back years from that, Matthew Centrowitz was a Olympic medalist.
Centro. Everybody's favorite medalist.
Yeah, I mean that was. I mean, just talk about like racing. I mean, that was such
Yep.
an incredible race that he ran in Rio. You know, we've done very well like in the middle distances and on up. I mean, Nico Young's done some
Yep.
great things. I mean, winning Diamond League races, that type of thing. But the men's marathon is just still that event that we're not quite there yet. I mean, I think we're getting closer. With Connor Mance specifically. He just ran an incredible time, in Chicago, and has shown that he can that he's just fearless and unafraid to put himself like in those types of situations. But I think we're getting there. I think we're
And
getting closer.
does I mean, the college scene for the longest time has provided runners for you, right? The NCAA system, you were part of it. Does that system is designed for competition between colleges, though, and therefore colleges will act in their own best interest, right, and not necessarily the best interest of the country. So their
Well,
incentive isn't to develop Americans. So does that concern you at all?
no, I mean, there's a lot of top foreign talent running
Yep.
collegiately here in
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the U.S. as well. But the
Massively.
collegiate system itself, just in recent years, has changed with the intro of NIL and
Yep.
relaxed rules around transferring and using the transfer portal. So I'll be curious to see sort of how that shakes out over the next 5 or so years, because kids aren't sticking around quite as long as they used to in the past, which makes it hard to really develop. But yeah, I mean, historically, the NCAA has been, very much a developmental system for folks in their late teens to, early to mid 20s, depending on where you went to school.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it is unlike anything else that exists in the world, because that type of collegiate system does not exist outside of the US. It's much more,
No.
club based. And I do think it helps keep some folks in the sport longer where they otherwise,
Yep.
wouldn't pursue it. But then where challenges arise is coming out of that, is giving folks who are like pretty good in college and may be able to break through the support that they need to do just that. And there's more opportunities than there ever have been for that, but it's still not a lot really
Yeah.
when it comes down to it. And that's something I'm kind of keeping an eye on, because I mean, to compete at that level now, I mean, takes almost full time dedication and focus, but not a lot of people can, make a full-time dedication to it. So be curious to see how it shakes out.
Yeah.
You mentioned Molly Seidel there earlier. She's moving to trail, isn't she? I think we mentioned it on this podcast. How do
Yep.
you
Hmm.
think she'll do there?
I think ultimately she'll do really well. But there's a bit of a learning curve because in a lot of ways, is a completely different sport to racing marathons on the road. I mean, going into it, she has the pure running ability of, I think, pretty much anybody who's in the sport is a low, 220s marathoner and Olympic medalist. She can compete. But I mean, moving on up to 100K, 100-mile distance, it's completely different world than the marathon. I think it's just going to take her a little bit of time to learn how to train for those, how to race those distances, how to fuel herself for those distances. But I mean, she seems pretty determined. She's really not that old either. So I think she's got some time to figure that out. And we've seen evidence of other good runners who've moved up effectively. I think of Magda Boulet here in the US. She won Western State. She was an Olympian in 2008, ran mid 220s before, super shoes. And, she's done quite well. And I think Molly moved up at the right time because, I mean, she's really not that old. So she has some room to grow there. And I think too, with ultra running, it's so diverse just in terms of the distances that classify as ultra running, but also just the types of races that you can run. I mean, I think she's going to do really well in these longer, more runnable races. Do I think like Molly Seidel is going to be on the podium at UTMB? Probably not. But I do think she could probably win Western States, that type of thing. Those are two very different events. I mean, that's for women, that's a 15, 16-hour event versus a 23, 24-hour, type of event. But I am excited to see what she can do in the ultra world because I think she's got the physiological tools. She's an incredible competitor, as we've seen time in and time out here throughout her career as a high schooler, collegiate, and professional. But once she kind of figures out this trail and ultra thing and she stays healthy, I don't see why she won't be a force.
Yeah.
I mean, how many like low to mid 220 Olympic medalist women do we have running ultras?
I mean, we don't have many of those as just in general, let alone running ultras.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. So,
um, and it's a well trodden path, right? Being a good runner going towards the trails, and then it's just how
mhm.
well you convert, as you said, and then certainly if you want to convert into that more mountain type racing, you got to spend some more time. Jim Walmsley was a good track runner, converted, and then took him some time to get UTMB
It took him
right.
time. Exactly.
Tom Evans was the same thing. Like
Yep.
Tom Evans ran European Cross last year, right? So he can still run.
Yep.
So we'll see. But talking about trail running, it's in its like it's growing up and or it's in its
Hmm.
adolescence somewhere there. Depends who you are
I
and how
think
you
that's
think
right.
about.
Yeah.
Um, and so, like, what are you seeing from trail running? I mean, just for context, you've coached people who've podiumed at UTMB before, so you are from this space. You do get it. You have been to UTMB. You're probably 10 years ago now, so you've seen it really grow up. So, what are you seeing from it that we should be looking for? What's exciting you or what's concerning you?
Um, I'll be all over the place again with my
Please,
answer on this,
please. The
but
questions are designed that way.
I mean, the excitement is just the increased level of depth and competition. I mean, and there are just better runners getting into the sport. And I mean, that wasn't the case certainly 20 years ago. It was the case. It started being the case like 10 years ago, but now like with increasing frequency, you have folks who are in their early to mid 20s coming off of a cross country track or maybe even brief road racing career saying, let me try this trail thing versus waiting till, their 30s when
Yep.
they're well beyond that. So, I mean, you're seeing just younger and better talent coming into the sport on both the men's and women's side in increasing depth as well. Like what it takes to get on the podium at these races now is certainly a
Yeah.
lot different than it was 5 and 10 years ago. And to me, that's exciting. I mean, it's becoming a much more competitive sport. I mean, it's there are growing pains that are certainly happening in trail and ultra running. Some of that is with the events themselves just getting bigger. And it's probably similar to like surfing or skateboarding. We have people who are just in it kind of for the
Yep.
culture and sort of the grassroots, for lack of a better word, dirtbag nature of it. And now it's professionalizing. It's becoming like an actual sport. And these races are, I mean, just big time events. The last time I was at UTMB myself was 2019. And I know it's changed a lot since then. That was only 6 years ago. Just in terms of the number of races that are happening that week, the number of participants that are taking part, the number of people who are there to spectate. But also, just if you look at all of those events, I mean, it used to be just UTMB, and that still is like, just focusing on that. It's like the unofficial, trail running world championship. Even though this year's trail running world championships themselves, like the actual ones, were fantastic. I was there for
Yep.
that back in September. But it used to be like UTMB, and like all the good runners would run UTMB. It didn't matter if like they were a 50-mile specialist or they were 100-mile mountain specialists. They would go and run UTMB, and the other races were pretty watered down and didn't get any. Certainly didn't get the top athletes and didn't get really any media attention. Now that whole week, every race is stacked. I mean, the
Yep.
OCC is stacked, the CCC is stacked, the TDS is stacked, and then UTMB itself, which is still the kind of the grand finale, and the most iconic one being the loop around the mountain, is very stacked year in and year out, and that is, to me, like, that's very, very exciting. But I also worry about what I call the Ironmanification of ultra running, and trail running, because I mean, Ironman does own a pretty
Yep.
significant stake in it now. And I mean, I just had, as we're having this conversation, UTMB just canceled their inaugural, I think it was California, I think it's called California Pacific Trails Race. It was down in Santa Barbara, which is in Southern
Oh,
California.
that's a lovely part of the world to race on.
It is, and they've recently experienced a lot of rain,
Yep.
and the trails are in rough shape. I had two athletes
Always.
who were racing down there, one in the 50K, one in the 20K, and it got canceled. And it's kind of this little panic and scramble of like, oh, what are we going to do now that this event is canceled? I'm like, well, here's what they're going to do, because my wife is an Ironman triathlete. I'm like, they are going to email you within the next day or two. They're going to give you no more than 6 options to defer your entry to, or they're going to offer you a refund. That's exactly, kind of what they did. And so they're putting that Ironman playbook onto UTMB, and Ironman is, you very well know, David, it's very like ubiquitous in triathlon. I mean, people are putting this stupid M.dot tattoo like on their body as if it exists, but it kind of comes at the expense of people thinking like that's all there is. Like it's Ironman or bust, right? And I think in ultra running, there is this attitude now. It's kind of UTMB or bust, and there's people pushing against that. But I mean, you have other races that want to become races where you can get stones for UTMB, or they want to become a golden ticket race for Western states, but that's also tied into like UTMB. And my
Yep.
worry is that if it just becomes about the UTMB series, like that's not healthy for the sport, as a whole. So I'm a little bit worried about that. I mean, I think the folks at Ironman and Hoka, which is the presenting sponsor, they know what they're doing. Like they know, where people are going and what has impact. And it's a business for them, right? And so they're trying to maximize that. But I don't know if long term that's great for the health of the sport. So be interesting to see kind of how all that plays out. That said, I was at the Trail Running World Championships in Conflans, Spain this year, and it was a true world championship. They had different distances, basically like essentially a VK race, short course, which was anything but short, and then the long course, which was very, very long. But the competition in all those races was stout, which has not always been the case in the last 10 years or so. And I think the organizers there did a great job. But I mean, you had people who skipped UTMB and like bigger races where they may or may not have gotten a payday in order to represent their country at the World Championships. And that's huge. You had some people who double dip, but I
Oh,
know, um, I coach a French athlete who raced for the French team. None of the French athletes were allowed to race at any of the UTMB races
it's
because
worthwhile mentioning who that French athlete is for listeners. I think they would have heard of him.
Vincent Bouillard,
Yeah.
who's a UTMB champion. He was 10th this year at the World Championships. But my point being is like the French Federation and the French athletes, like they took it very seriously. I mean, I know many of those guys would have liked to have run something at
Yep.
UTMB week, but they prioritized the world championship. The men won the team title, on the long course side. And that was a big deal. And that wasn't happening, certainly not 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, really. So that's exciting to me, because to your point earlier about kind of the Olympics, I mean, I do think, people have a lot of pride, like in their teams, but also their country. Right.
Yep.
So it's like, if you're an LA Lakers fan, you're probably an LA Lakers fan for life, as you said. Like, I grew up in Massachusetts. I mean, I'm a lifelong Boston Celtics, Red Sox fan. I mean, the number of people who have gone through those organizations over the years, has been a lot, but I like them while they're on the team, but like, I'm a fan of the team. If you're born in a country or you've lived there long enough and that's who your allegiance is to, that's who you're going to root for. And I mean, you saw that at the world championships. I mean, that was
Yep.
huge. You had athletes who wanted to represent their country on the biggest stage. And that's what I mean about it being a real world championship versus a de facto at UTMB. Like, you go to
Yep.
UTMB, you wear your sponsor's kit, and like, yeah, maybe an American guy wins or French guy wins. And that's great. But at the world championships, like, you're wearing your country's kit, you're standing up there with, your country, and people are waving flags, like, kind of all around the course. It's a different thing. And I think, I think there's something there to like draw more people in. It's just like kind of get them, uh, following the team, or in this case, like a country. But I mean, that was a good thing for trail running. I think this year was just the world championships, people taking
Yep.
it seriously and having that country pride, no matter where they were from, countries sending their best team or as good of a team as they could send with, who was available. More countries having, trial races, for these championships, which wasn't happening 5 or 10 years ago. So I think that's a good, development for, trail and ultra running, to separate a little bit from like UTMB, which again, I don't think UTMB on its own is a bad thing, but it can't be the only thing.
Yeah.
There has to be other races that are meaningful outside of just that series.
Yeah. And part of the reason I think the World Champs did so well is it's now under World Athletics. So it's now a World
Mhm.
Athletics race and therefore held to standards and all sorts of other things that go with it. So I think that's great.
Yep.
But I got a couple more questions, Mario. I don't want to keep you too much. One of the questions I had is for listeners, again, as a gift to listeners, your favorite 3 running books.
Oh, my favorite 3 running books. Well, one of them is a novel. It is by John L. Parker Jr., Once a Runner, kind of a cult classic, written in or just after that first boom, in the 1970s. John
Yep.
L. Parker was part of that. He ran with the Florida Track Club here in the U.S., which is where Frank Shorter and Jack Batchelor, trained, and some of the characters in that novel were loosely based on some of those folks. I read that in high school, and it's still to this day, I still think it's a very well written book, and I just devoured it. And I'll still go back to it, but that lit a spark in me as a teenager. So it was very formative book in that way. Um, Another one of my favorites has nothing to do with the competitive side of the sport, but it's by, um, Haruki Murakami, and it's what I talk about when I talk about
I
running.
knew that one
And
was coming. Yep.
yeah, and I read that. I mean, I was well into it at that point. I mean, certainly after college sometime. I don't remember when I first read it. I have it right here over on my bookshelf, but it's kind of a memoir of his. I mean, um, he is not competitive, even though he would do, some races here and there. But running is just such a big part of his creative process in his life, and just something that he does, every day. And he draws a lot of parallels between the practice of being a writer or a novelist, and, the discipline that it takes to, be running. And I think he just did a masterful job with that book. And then let me see. I'm just gonna have to. I've read so many dang running books. I've got to go through everything here. Oh man, I have some old ones on my shelf. I'm gonna say this one's out of print, but, I will say, Best Efforts by Kenny Moore, which is kind of a
Okay.
collection of essays. And this is another one from like that first running boom. So Kenny Moore went to the University of Oregon. He was a teammate of Steve Prefontaine's, longtime running writer, wrote for, Sports Illustrated when it was in his
Yep.
heyday. But he's someone who was, kind of in it. So he understood the competitive side of it really well. But um, he was kind of, I wouldn't say one of the first documentarians of the sport, but that book is essentially like documentary style of things that he experienced either as an athlete or as kind of an observer. And there's one story in there about, um, this race that used to happen in Hawaii called Run. I think it was called Run for the Chrysanthemums, which is a type of flower, but it was a stage race that happened in Hawaii back in the 70s. And again, it was sort of the first boom, and it wasn't, I mean, this wasn't something people did because it was like an experience. Like it was like a flat out like stage race running in Hawaii. And his account of it is just like really fascinating. And there's no races that I know of that are quite like that. I mean, there are stage races now, but they're more ultra distance type of things, like, you know, Marathon des Sables or whatever.
Yep.
But like, you know, this kind of, I mean, this book is just kind of a compilation of essays, and really just kind of his observations as someone who was both like a participant in it, but also like kind of an observer of what else was happening, you know, at the time. So that's another good one. But man, I've got so many. I mean, I'm just looking at my bookshelf now. There's another one called Running with the Legends, which was by a guy named Mike Sandrock. That book came out in the 90s. So we call that like second running boom. And they were just little profiles of a lot of the top athletes in the world at the time, or even like previously. Some of them were long retired, if not dead. But he profiled like Emil Zatopek in there, Rosa Mota, Joan Benoit Samuelson, Syed Ayuda, Bill Rogers, Rob de Castella. Like, I mean, it's just, I love biography. I love autobiography. So I love just reading these stories about people and kind of how they got into running. And again, like looking for those common threads between people's stories. And I think if you really look for those, you see like there's just a lot more that we have in common than we do different. That's what I love about like, you know, those types of stories. I mean, back to kind of biography, autobiography type things. I have Running with the Buffaloes, which is kind of a cult classic here in the US by a guy named Chris Lear. He followed the University of Colorado cross country team around in 1998. He wrote another book called Sub 4, which was about Alan Webb, who still is the American record holder in the high school mile here in the US. And I think the senior mile as well. I don't think anyone's broken that yet, now that I think about it. But he wrote this book about his transition to the University of Michigan out of high school, which he didn't stay there very long, but it was kind of like this inside look at, you know, what the day-to-day looked like. And you kind of get those, you know, you get those in-between moments in those books that feel like very relatable or maybe are aspirational type of thing. I've always loved those types of stories.
Kenny Moore
I'm
wrote
just
another
very
book.
I'm just disappointed that none of those books have the official or rock and roll in their title. I don't know if they can be any good.
Kenny Moore wrote another great book called Bauman and the Men of Oregon, which
I have
was
that
well
on the
worth
shelf
read.
over here. That was another good one.
My book to add to this list for people to listen to read is called I think we've talked about it before, Mario, is The Perfect Mile, which is just
on Bannister and the 4 Minute Mile. It's a great one. I'll give a shout out to Ed Caesar in 2 hours. I mean, so Ed Caesar he's a runner. He did a lot of reporting around Eliud Kipchoge's 2-hour marathon. He was on the ground in Monza at the original one. I think he was there when he actually did it at the Ineos event. But he wrote a book called 2 Hours, and it was just this kind of pursuit of the 2-hour marathon. But it's very much a narrative. And Ed's just a phenomenal writer. I mean, he writes primarily for the New Yorker and does a lot of big non-running magazine pieces every year. I actually have one on my desktop here that he sent me called The Irishman, which is about this like, you know, Irish drug lord. That'll be a wild read, I'm sure. But he wrote this book 2 hours, and he really does an incredible job of humanizing a lot of these athletes because of the fact that they don't have a lot of media attention on them. Maybe their English isn't so great. They're not social media savvy. He goes and spends time with them and tells their stories. And again, like that is super important. And I mean, I think that's, you know, to a point that you made earlier, Zylan, about like athletes, maybe not being good at that or like not having the time and having teams that can like provide those types of things. Yes, like all for that. And I mean, I think there are groups that are doing a great job of that. Shout out to Northern Arizona Elite here in the US, which is now run by a guy named Jack Mullaney, but was founded by Ben Rosario maybe 10 or so years ago. And a big part of him founding that team was to tell the story. Like they were going to become their own media company and like tell these stories. And they've done an incredible job of that. I mean, he would keep stats during like the Olympic trials and national championships and all that about like, what teams were and athletes were getting mentioned online. And even though, I mean, they did have an Olympian in Alafine Tuliamuk in 2020, but they were getting more like social media mentions and like people sharing those stories than, some of the Nike athletes who weren't getting that type of, support. So I think that is super important, but also like, this is why media is important. Like, yeah, people are going to tell their own stories and you have influencers who are just kind of obnoxious and annoying and, in that regard. And I don't think that should be the job of a professional athlete, but like, real journalists and people who are professional storytellers like Ed Caesar, like it's important for them to be telling stories of these athletes. And so I hope we don't, that's something I hope we don't lose in this kind of modern media environment that we're in. I just keep looking back at my shelves. I'm like, man, I've got so many good running books. I know you only asked me for 3. I mean, there's one called The Greatest, which is the Haile Gebrselassie story, which probably a lot of people, I have a lot of obscure titles on
I love
my
it.
bookshelf. So
this is why I love talking to you, Mario. It's been so great. We really, really appreciate your time, your willingness to give, and educating us in the history of running. I think I know a lot of people who listen to this podcast. Not all of the listeners, but I know a lot of them. And a lot of them are recent additions to running. So I think they'll get a lot out of this. I'd encourage them to go back, watch the races, read the books. There's a lot there, as you say. There's not a lot that's new in what we're seeing today, and therefore the history is really cool as well and interesting. So
yeah, well, thank you both for the opportunity to nerd out about this stuff. I hope those of you listening enjoy this. I mean, I could do this all day. I do this all day oftentimes. So I appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome back anytime you want to nerd out. Anytime you want to talk about something, you want to rant, you want to get on here, talk about things, please let us know. You
careful what you ask for. Yeah, I may take you up on that at some point. So thank you.
You are open invite. Absolutely open invite. Thank you so much, Mario. We really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
That was your mate, Mario Fraioli. I didn't know what to expect. Obviously, I read his newsletter and you mentioned his name a ton of times, but I haven't sort of seen him on video podcasts apart from a bit of prep for this episode. So I didn't really know what to expect, but yeah, it just felt like someone you could shoot the breeze with for hours.
Well, that's why he's got a podcast. That's why he's a journalist. That's like all the things, right? That's why he's a coach, because he's, very personable. Big fan of Mario. I mean, very humble guy. He's done a lot in the sport. In his intro, if you go back and listen to that intro, he's pretty much done everything there is to do in coaching, aside from maybe winning an Olympic gold medal. But he's done really well there, and really cool view on running and very grounded. So I like him, and content. To be honest, we didn't talk about content too much, but him and I have talked a lot about content, both as newsletter writers ourselves, but also as podcasters and other things.
What do you mean?
Really enjoyed
what do you mean when you say content? That's a very broad term.
Exactly what we mean. That is intentionally broad. So I was asking him about where he thought things like running content was at, what he thought about the podcast landscape, those sort of things in one of our recent conversations. And I won't share too much of what was said because it's a private conversation. I don't want to do that. But I was bemoaning what feels like a sort of dearth of quality of some podcast content. Like I'm struggling a lot at the moment, and I was trying to work out if it was my perception or if it was a real dearth. Right? Like, has something changed about me, or has something changed in the industry? Is the question I was asking Mario, really. So anyway, we appreciate everybody listening and tuning into this podcast. Please do rate the podcast if you haven't yet. We'd appreciate you subscribing if you're not subscribed. You can subscribe on as many platforms as you want. We are on YouTube as well, Apple Podcasts, etc. Join the Strava group, be part of that conversation there. Of course, engage with us on social media as well. It all makes a difference. It all brightens our day and helps us to grow the podcast.
Thank you very much. We appreciate every single one of you. We publish a new episode every single Friday, and we will catch you on the next one. Thank you, David.
Thanks, mate.